The book of Esther in most of your Bibles probably appears twice. Once in an English translation of the Hebrew, and once in an English translation of the Greek. Because we have a Hebrew Esther and a Greek Esther. And the Hebrew Esther was taken into the canon, it's canonical. The Greek was left out. It's worth noticing them because they're quite different. The basic story is the same. I think many of you know the story of Esther in outline. But it tells you something happened between the writing of the Hebrew Esther and the writing of the Greek Esther, and it probably has considerable religious and cultural importance. Esther, the name, is a Persian name, and it comes from Ishtar. And Ishtar is Astarte, is Venus. Right. So the great pagan goddess, who's borrowed by one culture after another, beginning as Ishtar, then called Astarte, then called Venus in Latin, is Esther's name, and she got that as a Persian, but she's a Hebrew woman, and we're given her Hebrew name, which is Hadassah, which means myrtle, the myrtle tree. But she's always called Esther, where Hadassah is mentioned only once. Now, what that tells you right away is that that's okay with this writer. Her having a Persian name is not something you try to get away from. Let's go back to calling her Hadassah. The book is called the Book of Esther. And the other hero of the book is her uncle, whose name is Mordecai. Mordecai is a variant of Marduk, the great high god of Mesopotamia. So both uncle and niece are named after Mesopotamian deities who were, moved on to be Greek deities and Roman deities that borrowed by each successive culture. Mordecai is never called anything else. We don't have any Hebrew name for him, which again reminds us that it looks as though Persian is okay with this writer. Jews with a lot of Persian gloss to them are acceptable, more than acceptable. The big difference, the outstanding difference between the Book of Esther in Hebrew and the Book of Esther in Greek is the prominence of one character in the Greek and the absence of that character in the Hebrew. Can anyone guess what that character is? God. Amazingly, the Hebrew Esther has no God. God is mentioned all the time in all the books of the Bible. I mean, even sometimes for kind of silly reasons, but anything that might have to do with God, God is mentioned. No God in the book of Esther at all. Wow. In the book of Esther in Greek, God, the God of the Hebrews, Yahweh, is mentioned 55 times. It's a short book. So the Greek Esther is strewn with references to God. The Hebrew Esther is totally without references to God. Why do you think that might be?
No idea.
That's a good question.
Well, the Greek, somebody's offering an answer?
No.
What are you offering?
No, I'm just thinking, why would the Hebrew was out without reference to God?
Hebrew is without reference to God. Now, the Greek is clearly trying to fix it. Right. The Greek editors are trying to religion this up.
Right.
Why the Hebrew doesn't have God is another question. But given that it doesn't have God, and that the Greek translators, these were very learned Jewish translators in Alexandria in Egypt, translating into Greek, same ones who did the Septuagint and all. They saw this as something you got to fix. So God comes in over and over and over and over.
Yeah, I got God in mind, so
you got God.
Mine must be Greek.
Yeah.
So the answer to
Got a little background music.
the answer to
Is
the
that Greek
question.
music or Hebrew music? Let's just look at the story in bare outline, first of all.
What is irreverent?
In the stories we have it, once upon a time in a faraway land, there was a king called Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus is a garbling of the name of Artaxerxes, who is usually called Xerxes. And he is very famous. Herodotus in the Persian Wars has a lot about him. He's well known and well documented. All kinds of inscriptions about Xerxes and all. So it's the same guy, but the name is kind of garbled. He's king of Persia, and as the story opens, that's all you got. You've got the king, and he's feeling good about himself, and he's going to have a big party. And his queen comes to him and says, "You're going to have a big guys' party. Could I have a big girls' party?" He said, "Sure, why not?" So these two huge banquets are put on. And in the course of the boys' banquet, apparently Ahasuerus mentions my queen, Vashti, as I guess all of you know, is absolutely gorgeous. It sounds very Trump-like to me.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So I think you guys should see my amazing wife. And he sends to ask Vashti to just come in and kind of, maybe spin around a few times or something. And she says, "The hell with that." No, I'm not going to do that. So immediately we see a little female uppityness here. Vashti is not going to play that game. Well, he's king. 127 provinces. He kind of rules most of the known world. And no little Vashti is going to say no to him when he just wants her to pose for the boys. So Vashti has to go. He is going to put away Vashti. So that's the first step. Vashti, you are done. Start packing. She's not going to be beheaded or anything, but she is dismissed. Okay, well, what do we do now? He doesn't know. So he calls his counselors, the people he trusts, and says, "What do you think I should do at this point?" They said, "Well, the first thing is to send out an edict to everybody, everywhere, saying that your putting away of your wife is meant as a moral exemplar. Let every man realize that the king has exemplified the way that uppity wives should be treated." So this will be remembered as a sign that women should be submissive to their husbands, and husbands should expect that and act accordingly if they don't do it. Okay, write that up and I'll tweet it in the morning. So they do that. They write up this thing saying the king has put aside his wife, lovely Vashti, and he wants you to know that he has behaved the way all of you guys ought to behave with respect to your wives, and all you wives might learn a little something from the fate of Vashti. Now, as I mentioned before, Xerxes is famous in history. Major historians write about him. There's no Queen Vashti anywhere.
How do you spell that name?
V-A-S-H-T-I. Vashti. But she's unknown to anything except the Book of Esther. And there's all kinds of stuff about Xerxes. He has a nice wife to whom he's very devoted. Her name is Amestris, and they lived together all their lives. She was never divorced. So what's going on here?
Yeah.
Who knows? Obviously a legend is going on here. It does imply that the author doesn't know much about Xerxes, and therefore he can kind of put this in. He's trying to, make a point. But he couldn't make the point if he knew as much about Xerxes as modern readers of history do. So it looks like she's made up, or she may be lifted from some other kind of short story and dropped in there in order to make a point. Okay, so goodbye Vashti, and all you guys now know how to conduct yourselves with your women. What else do you counselors have to recommend? Oh, you need a wife. Well, how do we do that? We are going to have a kind of sort of empire-wide beauty contest.
I was gonna say a contest.
Yeah, this is too much like that.
Here we go.
No, this is too much.
How did he get rid of his wife? Do they say?
No, he just
dismiss.
exile, bye-bye,
He
yeah.
didn't kill her.
No
Okay.
damage. No.
He had her.
Yeah, she's not Queen Vashti anymore. She's a little Vashti down the street. So we got to get you a wife. And okay, so we'll send out people everywhere to find the most beautiful women. And then
Virgins, huh?
yes, virgins.
Virgins.
We'll line up all these beautiful virgins, and then we'll, get a short list.
Short list.
And bring the short list to the king, and he will pick from the short list. The others will all be told you're fired. There are too many parallels. So they travel all over, and they find that there's this guy named Mordecai who has a niece named Hadassah, and Hadassah is just ravishing. So put her on the short list, bring her to the king, and when the king sees her, everybody else, bye-bye, everyone. Hadassah is it. Hadassah has to be got ready for her engagement to the king, the consummation of the marriage, and that, according to the Greek text, takes 2 years. According to the Hebrew text, it takes 1 year. How is this 1 year spent? Cosmetics.
Oh, yeah.
This is all cosmetic treatments for 1 year. So she looks pretty great already, but not great enough, I guess. So for 1 year, she is, wiped with ointments, sprinkled with scents. Things are done to her hair, her nails, etc. for a year.
A year.
In the Greek text, 2 years.
Wow.
And then at last, the beauty people, the beauticians all say, we think you're ready. Again, it sounds kind of like preparing for a TV show or something like that. Okay, your handler or something. So she is brought to the king, and the king thinks she's just right. And he loves her very much, and she loves him very much back. And there you are.
And he'd been waiting 2 years.
So we.
Well, he has a harem.
Oh, he has a harem.
He has a harem.
Oh, okay.
Now, this is to be queen.
Hey, I hasn't been waiting at all.
Oh, he knows what to do with his spare time.
But she has to be humble. I mean, she
Oh,
can't be
yeah.
uppity.
Yeah.
And be uppity.
So, she is going to be very nice. And she's represented all through here as being very nice. She says the right thing, does the right thing, gets it right. Meanwhile, her uncle Mordecai, we have to say something about him. We are told in the Greek text that Mordecai, well, in one editing of the Hebrew text, we are told that Mordecai is descended from Kish, K-I-S-H, who was one of the exiles brought into Babylonia in the Babylonian exile. In the Greek text, we're told Mordecai was brought in to the Babylonian, with the Babylonian exile. Well, if he was, then at the story, when the story opens, he would be about 112 years old, which does not seem likely since he's going to live happily ever after for a long time. So something funny is going on there too. It appears that in some versions of the Hebrew text, it was Mordecai who came in with the exiles, way back in 597. That's a long, long time before Xerxes. How could this happen? Again, it implies just kind of ignorance. You know, we've got a story to tell. You know, I don't have much information about what happened when. This guy's Jewish. He came with the Jewish exiles. And then somebody along the road said, this is impossible. He couldn't be that old. So they said, no, his ancestor came with the exiles. But the older texts seem to be the ones that says he came with the exiles, which implies that the writer of the book of Esther, again, is not hung up on history or anything like that. He wants to tell a story. Mordecai in the Hebrew book of Esther is represented as a humble Jewish guy who kind of hangs around, and once his niece has been brought in as queen, he hangs around outside of the court. You know, kind of like sits in the park across from the palace kind of thing, which seems a little odd, but that's what he does. And it's, but people did do that, and they kind of hung around and gossiped, etc. So that's what he's doing. In the Greek text of the book of Esther, Mordecai is a great member of the government from the start, highly placed confidant of the king. And they're both in the Bible. I'm not going to switch back and forth because we'd never get done, so just take my word for it. We'll look at some of the texts. Again, kind of strange. You know, which is the real Mordecai, if there is a real Mordecai. So back to the Hebrew book of Esther, the canonical book of Esther. Mordecai is hanging around. And while he's hanging around, sitting in the park, I mean, figuratively, he hears a couple of people hatching a plot to assassinate the king. And he listens very intently. And some people think actually he was a spy. I mean, there was a real spy, but these are all just conjectures. But anyhow, he picks up news of the plot, and he goes to Esther, or he doesn't go to Esther, he can't go to Esther, because you have to have all kinds of, you know, I guess PIN numbers and things like that to get in there. So he goes to the attendants and asks them to take a message to Esther, and the message tells Esther to tell the king this plot is going on, these are the guys I heard hatching the plot, do what has to be done. So Esther does. She gets the message to the king. The king investigates, finds out that Mordecai's report is absolutely right, and executes the plotters and their co-conspirators. What does he do about Mordecai? Nothing, and that will be important afterward. He may not even know about Mordecai. Remember, this came from Esther, but you would expect that Esther would say, Uncle Mordecai gave me this information.
Right, yeah.
Otherwise, he'd certainly ask, how do you know? But anyhow, nothing is done about Mordecai. And then the Grand Vizier of the king, the sort of Secretary of State, or whatever you want to equivalent him to, is a man named Haman, H-A-M-A-N. He's called in the Greek text the king's son, which doesn't mean biological son, but really close. Just part of the family. But he's clearly considered very reliable and very important, and he turns out to be very proud and very pompous. And he gets the king to put forth a decree requiring everyone to bow to him whenever he happens by. And they do. Most people don't bump into him much anyway. But if Haman is coming down the sidewalk and you're there, you bow till he passes. But Mordecai won't do it.
He's
And
still hanging around outside the palace.
Mordecai is still out there, so Haman passes him by a lot, and everybody bows but Mordecai. And Haman is getting pissed. Who is the non-bower? And they say it's a Jewish guy named Mordecai. And something's going to have to be done about him. He considers, well, maybe the best thing is just kill him. But that would be beneath his dignity. That's the actual explanation of the thing. It would be beneath his dignity to kill Mordecai unless he kills a whole lot of other people with him. And you can't do things in a small way. So Mordecai is now on the hate list for Haman, and he's trying to decide how to dispose of him. His wife has a suggestion. Why don't you build a gibbet 50 cubits high? 50 cubits high would be like a 15-story building, and hang him from the top of it. That way, you know, everybody will get a good view of Mordecai hanging. So he builds the gibbet outside in the palace grounds.
Whose wife suggested this?
His own, Haman's wife.
But I thought
Okay,
he
not
didn't want
Esther.
to kill, like he didn't want to,
No, but this is when he gets to kill other people too.
oh, okay,
You'll be ready for it.
I see,
In other words, her point is you want to make this a spectacle,
I
a
see.
very public thing. So, okay, how is he going to do this? Probably the best thing would be just to kill all the Jews. Mordecai's a Jew, a lot of other Jews. Kill all the Jews, and Mordecai will be the main corpse. And we'll hang him up on that 50-cubit gibbet, and everybody will see, how this came about. So he gets the king he persuades the king that the Jews collectively are conspiring against the king. The Jews are out to get you. There is a people in our midst. Now remember, there were this people in their midst. These are the exiled Jews. And as I mentioned a number of times, they were doing pretty well. And you can kind of see they're doing pretty well because of, Esther gets to be queen. They would certainly check her lineage a bit. So he persuades the king that the Jews are organizing to overthrow him. They are his chief enemies. And the king says, okay, what do you think I should do? He said, I'll have a nice decree written up for you. All you need to do is sign it. So he writes up this decree saying, in effect, that all Jews everywhere, men, women, children, babies, old people, every Jew must go. So in all the provinces, again, this is taken to all 127 provinces, which stretch from India through Ethiopia into the Middle East. This is a big empire. So they've all got Jews in them. It's unbelievable, really. I mean, how could you deliver this message or beyond without modern means of communication? But anyway, that's the decree. And remember, the laws of the Medes and the Persians are irrevocable.
Oh.
So just sign this here decree, and the king takes his signet ring and gives it to Haman and says, you stamp it on anything you want. You're my guy. And so he stamps on everything that is going to destroy Jews, plunder their property, etc.
What's the king's name? Gullible?
That's Gullible the Second.
The second.
So, yeah, the king doesn't know. He isn't paying much attention to all of this. Okay.
No, he's got a new wife.
Huh?
He's got a new wife.
He's got a new wife, and she's Jewish.
Yeah.
But she's
But does he
okay.
know she's Jewish?
He doesn't.
He doesn't know
He
she's
doesn't
Jewish.
know she's Jewish.
Which again is kind of unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, really.
He knows Mordecai's Jewish, but he
He
doesn't know.
knows Mordecai is Jewish.
Well, how does that work out? He knows Mordecai's Jewish, but he doesn't know why
It
he is.
doesn't work out.
He didn't.
I mean, she could be, she could have given it up. She does have a Her name is Ishtar.
So they're more concerned about the practicing Jews, not the lineage.
Yeah, you mean in this decree to kill them all. And this is all, I mean, this whole,
Just to get rid of Mordecai.
this whole genocide
Yeah.
is just because Mordecai won't bow.
This is how wars
That's the
start.
whole thing. And just popping off Mordecai is beneath his dignity, so we have to have a little, you know, backup genocide. And here we go with all the rest of them. So that decree is out, and word comes to Mordecai. Mordecai hears this, and, you know, it's not yet implemented, but it's going to be, and he hears about it. And he sends word to Esther, you gotta do something about this is awful. Esther says, I can't do much, because the king is in private, and no one can go to the king when he's in private unless he extends his golden scepter and invites you. But he says, well, you know, give it a shot. So Esther first puts on mourning clothes to attract attention. You know, what's the matter with Esther? She was all dolled up a little while ago, and now she's looking miserable. And word of that comes to the king. And then she dolls herself up again and goes and asks if the king would grant her admission. And the king stretches out his golden scepter and says, come right in, Esther, what's the problem? She comes in and tells him what the problem is. These people, the Jews, are being slaughtered everywhere. And we can't have that, can we, old king? And he says, well, I did put out this decree, and it's, you know, I'm not quite sure what to do about it. Now, we find him ultimately just overthrowing it. So the unalterable laws of the Medes and the Persians get altered, and we're never told quite how that's brought off. Now we have Haman still trying to do all of this. The king then, I think I'm where I want to be. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. Esther holds a banquet and invites the king, Ahasuerus, and Haman to the banquet. They are her guests of honor. And all of that goes pretty well. The king likes Haman. Haman likes Ahasuerus. And Esther lets it be known that she has something more she wants to say after the banquet. Ahasuerus, after the banquet, is tired, and he goes to bed and falls asleep and dreams, and then he wakes up and he can't sleep and he wants something to occupy himself. So, you know, as we all do when we're bored, we ask for a whole box of imperial records. So he sends for these records, and he's looking through them. And oh yeah, I remember that plot against me. Yeah, that we overthrew that plot. And who's this guy? Mordecai? Who's Mordecai? He said, he's the guy who saved your life. He's the one who disclosed the plot. He said, oh, I must have done something pretty nice for him, huh? No, you didn't do anything for him. He said, well, I'll do something nice for him now. So you know, that was kind of lucky for Esther that he got the records and all. So now he knows that Mordecai is, from his point of view, a good guy who saved his life. So it's easy for Esther now to say that Mordecai is the target of Haman's genocide, and something has to be done about that. Well, what? Well, first of all, revoke the decree, spare the Jews. Okay, we can do that. And then she says, let's bring Haman in again. Haman comes in, and he still knows nothing about anything against him. And the king, feeling very ironic now, says, Haman, what do you think the king should do for the person whom he most admires, most esteems, and most wishes to honor. And Haman, who's already pretty honored, says, well, let's see. I guess I'd give him a lot of stuff and let him go through the whole city on a royal horse, proclaiming his greatness, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He comes up with a lot of honoring things. And the king says, okay, your assignment is do that for Mordecai.
Oh.
Mordecai who? Mordecai. So, okay. So he does that, and when he comes back, Mordecai is now in high honor, and Esther is asked what more should be done. And this is where a strange element comes into the thing. First of all, word should go out to all the Jews everywhere that they are not targeted anymore. Not only that, but they are welcome to defend themselves against any enemies.
Wow.
What enemies? We don't hear anything about enemies. So that's reassuring for them. And what about Mordecai? Well, the king takes a walk and says, what's that thing in the backyard? He said, that's something for Mordecai. That is something that Haman intended for Mordecai, and well, it would be a shame to waste it. So how about hanging Haman from his own gibbet? And Haman is hanged from his own gibbet.
Wow.
Talk about karma.
Yeah. That's it.
Instant karma.
Then Esther gets the king to send out another decree. And this one is even stranger and less believable. It's that Jews everywhere are now empowered to kill anyone they suspect of being an enemy.
Oh, that's...
And boy, do they. The latter part of the book describes this. They slaughter hundreds and then thousands of people and make a spectacle of Haman had 10 sons. All 10 sons are publicly impaled, and all over the realm, people that the Jews don't like get put to death by the Jews. Now, at this point, it's clearly totally unbelievable. I mean, this could not happen. Persian Empire, you guys can kill anybody you don't like. So what's going on here? What is the storyteller trying to do with this? First of all, he seems to be accepting that relations between Jews and pagans can be perfectly okay. I mean, Esther married a pagan king and lived happily ever after. Things are going very well for Esther and now going well for the Jews. So it does not come from that period of history where all the pagans are bad guys and all the Jews are good guys. This is where some pagans are bad guys, but most are not. We can coexist with them fine. But among them we find enemies, and those enemies we must do away with. As the thing continues, we have a lot of account of the slaughters. The slaughters of the supposed enemies of the Jews. And then the decision about when the pogrom, when the genocide was to begin, was made by Haman by casting lots. You know, how are we going to decide what day to do this? Again, you know, why do it that way? We will cast a lot, you know, or flip a coin, heads it's Thursday, tails it's Wednesday or something. Anyway, they cast lots, and the word for a lot is a pur, P-U-R. So the lots come down on a particular date in the month of Adar, and that's the day when all the Jews are to be exterminated. Well, it turns out instead to be the day on which all the enemies of the Jews begin to be exterminated. And so a latter part of the thing explains how this will be celebrated by Jews forever. This will be the feast of Purim.
Purim.
Yeah, you know, the feast of the lots. Now, Purim, as far as we know, was not celebrated, at least much, until well into the diaspora, you know, after the Christian era begins. After that it was, but Purim is a funny feast. Does anyone know anything about it? I
Why
mean,
would you celebrate when you killed a lot of people?
you can do that.
Why would that be a cause of celebration?
The victory.
Well, because they're bad guys.
But still.
It's a victory.
You're not going to get reasonable on it.
Oh, okay.
World War II.
Okay.
The famous
Uh,
with the nurse and the thing.
What was that? No, I thought somebody. Purim today is has anyone had any experience of Purim?
What?
Purim is sort of the Jewish Mardi Gras. It's remarkably secular. In the Talmud, you find debates among rabbis about how drunk you should get at Purim. I mean, that's literally that. You're kind of in ounces of quarts or whatever. Liters, I guess.
Well, actually, the rabbis like to drink.
They did, yeah.
Now, this feast falls between, like, what time of year?
The autumn.
Okay.
And it's still celebrated somewhat that way. It's a very secular feast. But as you've seen by now, it's a very secular book. You know, God has not been mentioned. You know, everybody's saved not by God, but by Mordecai and by luck and by Esther. So a number of chapters are now devoted to the Feast of Purim and how it will be celebrated at this time and what you're supposed to remember during it. And then at the very end, the book of Esther, still on the Hebrew book of Esther, we'll take a look at the Greek one after this. Find it. You have it there. Curiously, this is Book of Esther is 9 chapters long, 10 chapters long. In the 9th chapter, verse 24, after everything that's happened that I've just narrated, we get Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast Pur, that is, the lot, to crush and destroy them. But when Esther came before the king, he gave orders in writing that the wicked plot that he had devised against the Jews should come upon his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Now this is chapter 9. We know all that. You know, why is this in here? It has to come from a different source. Someone had written a little quickie summary of the book of Esther. Why? As a kind of a caption for the Feast of Purim. You wonder why we're celebrating the Feast of Purim? Well, once upon a time there was this. And then when this book was put together, they just stuck it in there. But you kind of wonder, why were they telling us this now? We know all this. Therefore, these days are called Purim, from the word pur. Thus, because of all that was written in this letter, and of what they had faced in this matter, and of what had happened to them, the Jews established and accepted as a custom for themselves and their descendants and all who joined them, that without fail they would continue to observe these 2 days every year, as it was written, and at the time appointed. So this is obviously long afterward. You know, the Jews have always done this. But the rest of the book is it's happening right now. So this is obviously an addition from way down the line when the Feast of Purim really was. going strong, and people were asking, you know, this is a lot of fun, but what's it all about? I recently had the interesting experience of talking to a guy and his wife, both of whom were graduates of Catholic schools. He's a doctor, you know, educated people, and both of them asked me if Easter had anything to do with religion. Very accurate. At first I thought they were kidding. I thought, well, I mean, they were quite sincerely asking this.
I demand my
They thought it
tuition
was like
back.
about, you know, bunnies and chicks and all that stuff. Yeah, it was kind of an agricultural fun. But they had gone to Catholic schools, and somehow Easter never made it.
I demand my tuition back.
Really kind of amazing.
Easter, I think, because I heard
What?
it on EWTN, they had people write, asking questions to Father, the smart guy on there. And that was one of the questions. Does Christmas and Easter have anything to do with
Is that right?
religion?
Yeah.
And that was one of the questions, because Easter comes from a word way back, a goddess. Easter?
No, Easter comes from east, the Orient. You know, the sun rises in the east.
Well, they said
Rising,
it's
yes.
from a goddess, Easter. And that's what they said, the history about it. And so they, you know, that's what they said. It was, that's why the word doesn't mention anything up in religion, Easter.
Oh,
Where
okay.
the word
Yeah.
Easter came.
Yeah.
But what you said makes it sound like it's a pun. The rising sun and the rising sun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
except it would be a pun in English, but
Yeah.
it's not.
it wasn't done in English.
Yeah, puns don't travel well.
I think he comes from.
And remember, we're getting into a whole other realm here, but in early Christianity, the sun and Christianity were very closely linked, partly because of the Emperor Constantine, who was the big champion of Christianity, but his own religion was the Sol Invictus, the unconquerable sun. And so they get more and more blended together, and there are more and more metaphors in which, you know, God is the sun who gives light and everything of the world, and the sun rises, and the pun wouldn't work in Latin, but, and his sun rises after death. So,
I think they said that the word Easter comes from Germany. In Germany, where
the English word Easter?
No, yeah, Estra. It comes from that word Estra, which is a goddess. They had a whole explanation on
Yeah.
about that the other day, about Easter.
Easter is an Aryan word. It has a, you know, in all the Romance languages, Easter is called from Passover, called Pascha, and so on. But in the Germanic languages, including English, it comes from the Germanic root, the Teutonic root, which is Esther. How do we get there? Okay, so you can see this is ultimately, this is a book that's about Purim. Purim is going strong. People are kind of, they like it, but they don't know where it came from. And this story, which must have existed anyway, is now tied on to Purim.
Oh, it seems that in this particular story, because God isn't mentioned, it seems like in the other events that have happened up at this time, there's been some kind of prophet involved, and that the prophet, somehow a message came down that they would celebrate an event, that it would be linked to God. But this one doesn't have any of that.
No.
So it was kind of like the community just decided to.
We have it, and we got to religion it up, yeah.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah, I think that kind of is it. But yeah, you're right, the others all have some prophetic or
Right.
or some of them, you know, the Passover is the Passover.
I know with the Purim that the Jewish people do now, it's
Yeah.
very much for children. They have
Yes.
rides,
Yes,
do all kinds of
Yeah.
fun magicians, and they have all kinds of things.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a festival.
Yeah.
A little like Easter for children, I mean.
Right,
it
right.
It's
rolls.
not about going out and killing thousands of people, but they don't like them.
Oh,
I mean, it's really changed then.
The one that's,
Now, the little bitty last chapter of Esther, I'll just read to you.
not that great.
King Ahasuerus laid tribute on the land and on the islands of the sea, which means that he's got a big empire and he's collecting taxes from everybody. Which is really a way of saying he is doing great.
Yeah.
Because collecting tribute was hard. I mean, you might conquer someplace, but getting them to pay taxes was another thing. You had to have people there to make them do it. All the acts of his power and might, and the full account of the high honor of Mordecai, Mordecai is now highly honored, to which the king advanced him, are they not written in the annals of the kings of Media and Persia? Well, no, they're not. I mean, we have a lot of that, and they're not in there. But they may have been in, you know, what was once part of it, who knows? We have all those references in the, you know, in the Torah and the Pentateuch to, you know, the books of the kings. We don't have any of those books of the kings. You know, all the rest about some relatively insignificant king. If you want to know more, look at the books of the kings of Israel. So there were such documents, and we don't have many more. For Mordecai the Jew, that's kind of emphasized, was next in rank to King Ahasuerus. Now this is obviously Jewish-Persian friendship in a big way. This comes from a time in which the Persians are our buddies. And indeed they were in it anyway. And he was powerful among the Jews and popular with his many kindred, for he sought the good of his people and interceded for the welfare of all his descendants. So basically the historical narrative is a narrative of Jews in Persia eliminating their enemies and teaming up with the Persian aristocracy and living happily ever after. And that's been linked to this other thing about Purim, how did they get there, and that's tied on to the festival. Now we have time to just look a little bit at the Greek book of Esther, which
I've got an epilogue in mind.
what does it say?
Mordecai's dream fulfilled, then Mordecai said,
Oh,
this is the work
that's
of
in the Greek
God.
book.
Spring,
Okay.
run into a river.
Now that's from the Greek book, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so,
Two dragons.
Two dragons.
That's cute.
okay, let's
Yeah.
go to the dragons then.
Yeah.
So this is from the Greek book. In the Greek book of Esther, which is longer than the Hebrew,
Oh.
there are A, B, C, D, E, F. There are 6 big editions,
I've just got F.
6 big pieces of text that are not in the canonical book of Esther. And the first one is Mordecai's dream. So let's look at that. Nothing remotely like this. And there's something about the dream when we get to it. Well, first of all, yeah, in the 2nd year of the reign of Artaxerxes the Great, now he's Artaxerxes, not Ahasuerus anymore. On the 1st day of Nisan, Mordecai, son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish of the tribe of Benjamin, had a dream. He was a Jew living in the city of Susa, a great man, serving in the court of the king. So Mordecai is a big shot from the start in this book, not in the other. He was one of the captives whom King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylonia had brought from Jerusalem with King Jeconiah of Judea. Well, King Nebuchadnezzar did that more than 100 years before Artaxerxes appeared on the scene. So it can't be. I mean, we can't have this 114-year-old guy doing all this stuff. And this was his dream. Noises and confusion, thunders and earthquake, tumult on the earth. Then 2 great dragons came forward, both ready to fight, and they roared terribly. At their roaring, every nation prepared for war to fight against the righteous nation. And it was a day of darkness and gloom, of tribulation and distress, affliction and great tumult on the earth. And the whole righteous nation was troubled. They feared the evils that threatened them. They were ready to perish. Then they cried out to God. They don't cry out to God in the other book. And their country, as though from a tiny spring, there came a great river with abundant water. Light came, the sun rose, the lowly were exalted, and devoured those held in honor. So it's an apocalypse. There's nothing even slightly apocalyptic in the other book.
That's the first chapter.
Now, the Greeks have put in this apocalyptic.
Chapter 8.
Interesting people.
Prologue of chapter 8.
Mordecai saw in this dream what God had determined to do. And after he awoke, he had it on his mind, seeking all day to understand it in every detail. So a very, very different kind of thing. Other things you might look at.
Now, does this, in terms of continuity, does this fit in anywhere in the Hebrew story? Or is this
Yeah, these things were just stuck into the story.
But we
But
don't
they
know
don't-
where they were stuck.
No, no.
Okay.
And they're incongruous. I mean, you can't
Yeah,
have
right.
Mordecai, both the
Right, yeah.
simple guy hanging around
Yeah.
in his sackcloth and being the second in power of the king. So the Mordecai here is the Mordecai that, in the other book, he winds up. And that would be the one they knew. You know, big shot Mordecai. So they made a big shot Mordecai from the start.
Read this. Has nothing to do with Esther.
And then we get the same
They
story.
never had children though, did they?
Who?
Esther
and the king.
and the king? Doesn't matter.
Artaxerxes certainly had children.
Right.
I mean,
Esther.
Esther is unknown to history. Xerxes had a mistress. His real wife, his historical wife, did have children.
When he put away.
No, no, she's fiction.
Vashti.
They're all fiction. I mean, history has no record of Esther, no record of Vashti.
Vashti.
There's just a mistress who was a nice wife.
You know, up in Arkansas, I knew 2 ladies as I was growing up, and they were named Vashti.
Is that right?
Same name, but
Yeah,
they pronounced it
Vashti.
Vashti.
Uh-huh.
Vashti. I always thought that was such a strange name, didn't know where it came from.
Were they ethnically identifiable in any way?
No, they were just
They were
regular Christian Baptist
folk.
people, you know. Somebody gave them a name out of the Bible.
And they couldn't have it because the Baptists don't have this book in the Bible. They don't have
Right.
it. Baptists don't have Esther's book.
I don't know what they've got, but anyway.
It couldn't come from the Bible.
Vashti Neal.
Notice the end of the Greek book of Esther here. This is chapter 11 of the Greek piece of it. This is edition F.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
In the 4th year of the reign of Ptolemy and Cleopatra, Dositheus, who said he was a priest and a Levite, and his son Ptolemy, brought to Egypt the preceding letter about Purim, which they said was authentic and had been translated by Lysimachus, son of Ptolemy, one of the residents of Jerusalem. Now this obviously is later, but it means you to know it's later. This is explaining how they got this thing. Lysimachus is real. He has a historical record. He was a translator, he was a scholar. And this is the way that the story of Esther got to the Greek-speaking Jews of Alexandria, according to this. And maybe it is. Beginning of edition F, notice, Mordecai said, "These things have come from God." Again, this is a theme throughout the whole Greek book of Esther, but nothing remotely like it in the Hebrew book of Esther. And then we get the also the whole decrees. Take a quick look at it. This is the great King Artaxerxes to the governors of the province from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, and to those who are loyal to one government, greetings. Many people, the more they are honored with the most generous kindness of their benefactors, the more proud do they become, and not only seek to injure our subjects, but in their inability to stand prosperity, they even undertake to scheme against their own benefactors. They not only take away thankfulness from others, but carried away by the boasts of those who know nothing of goodness, they even assume that they will escape the evil-hating justice of God, who always sees everything. Now this is Ahasuerus saying this now. So he's coming out for God. And often many of those who are set in places of authority have been made in part responsible for shedding innocent blood, and have been involved in irremediable calamities by the persuasion of friends who have been entrusted with the administration of public affairs. When these persons, by the false trickery of their evil natures, beguile the sincere goodwill of their sovereigns. That's a long introduction to a decree. What has been wickedly accomplished through the pestilent behavior of those who exercise authority, etc. Now, just go down to 15. We find that the Jews who were consigned to annihilation by this thrice accursed man, this is Haman, who has directed the kingdom both of us and for our ancestors in the most excellent order. You will therefore do well not to put in execution the letter sent by Haman, etc. So that's the cancellation of the irrevocable laws of the Medes and the Persians. It got revoked. Okay, so I think you can see what you got here. And it, historically, probably what's most important about it is it shows the attitude of the Jews were not xenophobic at this time. You know, the Persians, Persian pagans and Jews could be buddies. They could serve in the same government. And we know that was true to a considerable extent in Babylonia and even more in Persia. Then, as the time moves on, you get closer to the Hellenistic Seleucid rule, you find it moving in the other direction. All foreigners are bad guys. All foreigners are threats.
And that's
Xenophobia takes over.
And that's because why?
Well, that's because mainly the policies of Epiphanes IV. You know, the desecration of the temple and the Hellenization of the culture.
It seems in this history, looking at this history, that this is a theme that goes back and forth. There are times when there's a lot of exclusion and xenophobia, yes. And then there seem to be times where there's intermarriage that doesn't seem to exist.
Right.
And even to this day, that it seems just to repeat itself because of the creation of Israel. In that area, there wasn't a lot of tension between Jews and non-Jews, so there wasn't an issue at that time. But then it kind of
became an
raises
issue
its
because
head.
of political.
Right? Yeah, it kind of raises its head.
Yep.
Yeah.
If any of you are in Israel and you go to that kind of museum, the tunnel that goes all the way down, opens head over Jerusalem, that motif is brought out in the exhibits. You see the Jews kind of merging, becoming integrated with another community, and then boom, something happens. And in modern times, of course, what happened were outbreaks of anti-Semitism, the Holocaust, and all of that.
Right.
Because in the Enlightenment period, the big complaint about Orthodox Jews was Jews are getting just like everybody else. They're not speaking Hebrew, they're speaking German, they're performing in the orchestras of musicians and so on. And that was true. They were going to German schools, becoming as Germanized.